Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. Friends and familiars, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have a prolific writer that hails from Scotland. Since the release of his debut novel, The Forgotten Island, David has captivated readers with his unique brand of horror. He's joining me today to discuss his recent novel, Rotten Tommy. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of David Sodergren. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining me on this 17th day of June 2024. I came across your work by Bookstagram recommendation, so I decided to check out your most recent work entitled Rotten Tommy. One of the things I noticed right off the bat is your ruthlessly flawed but very realistic characters, as well as your ability to inject psychological horror into an already delicate existential crisis. So I was really impressed with the novel, and I'm looking forward to getting into the dark details.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's very kind. It is probably the worst possible novel of mine to talk about because so much of it is kept deliberately vague, but I will absolutely try my best to answer your questions.
Oh, I'm sure it'll be interesting regardless. Well, so the book is about a middle-aged woman named Becky Sharp. She's married with no children and was diagnosed late in life with autism. She's socially anxious and had a mother who was an actress that disappeared without a trace. Her father suffered from severe dementia and was in a personal care home. She has a husband who is distant, and I don't know if it's that he seems not to really believe that she's autistic or is just irritated by the fact for some reason. But one day, while construction workers are remodeling her house, they find a book containing 3 VHS tapes wrapped in a piece of paper that turns out to be a missing persons poster that looks oddly similar to her as a young child, and that is where the story begins. So, finding an intentionally hidden video creates a very ominous story dynamic. Found footage is already creepy, but when hidden, it often suggests something illegal, like a snuff film, for instance. Was this merely a necessary element for your storyline, or did you intentionally consider the ominous nature of hidden film? And if so, what did you do to elevate the suspense and dread leading up to the revelation of what was on those tapes?
It was absolutely intentional, the creepiness of lost media. I love the idea of lost footage and lost media of sorts, whether it's to do with film, like lost films or missing footage and things like that, or even with music. Like my favorite band, for example, is the Beach Boys, who are pretty notorious for having lost albums over the years. And there's something about the idea of specifically video for this story, because, the kind of horror I tend to like is maybe a bit more retro throwback kind of way. So the idea of a sort of analog horror, that this book, would be something you would see on video, sort of inspired me to make the book mirror that of like a videotape that has sort of different recordings on it, an old tape, and, people have recorded over little bits and pieces here. So even while try to tell a cohesive story, whenever there's a horror scene or perhaps a weirder sort of scene, it doesn't necessarily obey the same rules as previous scenes and previous things. It changes a little bit, So that was the sort of impetus for the sort of structure and content of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I've used sort of found footage before. I've got a book called Dead Girl Blues, where someone finds a video of a snuff film, actually. Although that one was, now I'm trying to remember that. I don't think that was an actual videotape. I'm sure that was a thumb drive or something like that. But that one, it was just like a 30-second sort of recording, and it was all about, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Blow Up, where someone takes a photo in a park and they capture a murderer in it. But every time they manage to zoom in to get more clues, it just obfuscates it even more. It becomes even more obscure. And that was what I did more with Dead Girl Blues. Whereas in Rotten Tommy, the mystery is, it's not really designed to be solved by the reader. It's designed for you to come to your own kind of conclusions with things. Although I think I've peppered in enough clues and ideas throughout that hopefully people can come up with their own conclusions, which I think that's quite exciting. I love ambiguity in my horror and generally sort of recoil from gratuitous exposition, shall we say.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I don't know why. A lot of times when I read books, it makes me think of movies. You know, I was thinking of, I don't know if you ever saw that movie. Is it 8mm with Nicolas Cage?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like in your story, you find the tapes, I guess, hidden in the drywall, basically. And then in 8mm, I think it was in a safe. You know, it's one thing to come across some videotapes in a box in the attic, you know, with grandpa's old stuff, or, you know, just you don't know whose stuff it is. It's not hidden. It's just kind of off in a place that there's not a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
But then when you find,
yeah.
But when you find something that you can tell is being either protected or outright hidden, that just really, the story was set for me when, you know, it was two things at once. It was accidentally found, but it was accidentally found in a place where they obviously didn't want anybody to find it.
Yeah.
Well, so Becky decides to take a trip into the city to go to an electronics shop that will transfer the tapes to a digital format and enhance their quality. While waiting on the videos, she visits her father, who's in a care home due to severe dementia. And her father doesn't remember her, and at one point makes a sexual comment towards her. And one of the many horrific aspects of aging is how undignified the process can be. Did you add this element to create a tone of existential dread, or was there another reason? And can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say almost everything that I write is to create a tone of existential dread.
Yeah.
Because I love a bit of existential dread.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly, as I get older, you know, I feel like the sort of spectre of aging and death looms ever larger. You know, I'm not that old yet. I'm in my 40s. I'm all right. But I have, you know, I've seen what dementia can do to relatives and things. And it's just horrifying the way it sort of robs people of their personality or even fundamentally changes it as a sort of real life body horror, sort of scarier than any monster or slasher that I could come up with. So, you know, just to create that, because the book definitely has a fairly consistently downbeat tone. I would say I tend to put a fair bit of humor in my books. There's probably a little bit or a fair bit less in this one than normal. And yeah, just putting in the dementia. It also ensures that, you know, part of the thing with the book is that Becky is completely alone throughout most of the book. And even people that she can trust and that she loves and that love her are held at a distance from her by circumstances, you know, any sort of circumstances. And in her dad's case, it's this horrible sort of circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, what's worse, your loved one is dead or they're alive, but you're dead to them?
Yeah,
you know,
that's totally grim.
Well, kind of just piggybacking off of what I just said, dementia can be as devastating as death, as sufferers forget who their loved ones are, including forgetting their names. So Did you write Becky's father having dementia to generate further mystery by having someone close to the event that's unable to remember or articulate anything about it? Or was there another reason?
It's funny. I never actually sort of thought about the fact that it further obscures the mystery. The dementia means that he, in theory, can't recall what he knows about the mystery. Mm-hmm. It was mostly to make sure that Becky was alone. But that's actually an interesting point. There's so much when you're writing that probably subconsciously seeps in.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it. I very much write on instinct, and the characters, I start writing without the characters fully formed at all. Mm. And as I write, they sort of reveal themselves. And usually about halfway through the book, I have to go right back to the very start because I've finally figured out who the characters are. And that changes the entire book. So generally, I end up going back partway through and starting from the beginning again. But yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at Becky's dad and the dementia, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my personal belief is that all creativity comes from the unconscious mind. And, it's kind of like his mind is kind of analogous to the videotapes. The videotapes are this old form that she can't readily watch. So she has to take them somewhere to get them converted, and her father was there during the purported time period or has got to have some knowledge of these tapes or possibly what's on them. And he's right there, but his mind is, gone. So yeah. It's like screwed up videotape, screwed up mind.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, during her excursion into town, Becky sees a dark figure that appears to be watching her. And when she visits her dad, he seems to have a moment of lucidity and tells her that the girl in the missing photo is in fact her, because I think at first she thought it might be her mom. But according to him, as it turns out, she wasn't missing. She was just on holiday. And she's like, well, I don't remember going on holiday by myself as a child. And it was in this mythical place called Rumplejack. So when Becky asks with whom, her father refuses to say the name. So was this because it brought up traumatic memories? Or was there a supernatural connection with the entity he was talking about and the utterance of his name?
So this is where we get into the outline that I started with had all of the questions that people have been asking me about the book answered, or nearly all of them. And I took most of them out. But in the outline, what I actually had, so the dad didn't say the name because he was under the impression that, part of his belief was that by saying the name Rotten Tommy, you would conjure him. Mm. Even in the outline where I explained everything, I'm allowed to swear in this, aren't I?
Fuck yeah.
I still completely fucked around. So in the outline, she goes to meet her dad, and then he explains exactly who Rotten Tommy is and what he thinks about it. And then later on, when they go and meet someone in a mental asylum, he also explains who Rotten Tommy is, but it's completely different to the dad's version. And then at the very end, another character explains who Rotten Tommy is. And again, that explanation is completely different. So it was very similar, actually, I realized, to The Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan film, where, if I remember correctly, Heath Ledger's Joker keeps giving himself a different origin story every time he's talking to someone.
Oh.
So it's kind of similar to that. So I was like, I had a feeling when I was writing it that people were going to be like, well, I want to know who he is and why he's doing this. Because I didn't really want to explain it, I gave them 3 different options, and it's going to be like, just pick whichever one you like the most. Uh-huh. So yeah, in that scene, it was that our father would not say the name. No one in the family would say the name. I think when we get to a certain videotape much later on as well, and it's the parents are in it, I think they both refused to say the name, I'm sure. That was his reason. And I kept that in because even though you didn't have specifically the reason that he wouldn't say the name, I thought, yeah, you'd be able to sort of infer something from that, and anything that adds to the sort of overwhelming mystery and sort of feeling of oppressive, all-consuming dread that's closing in on Becky as the story continues.
Yeah. You mentioned an outline. Are you for the most part, like a meticulous outliner, or do you just kind of have like a skeletal structure and you kind of pants in the spaces?
I very fully outline.
Ah.
I always have outlined fairly fully, but now in the last 4 or 5 books, yeah, it's, between 5 and 7,000 words or something. So it's not like massive. I treat the outline as a heavily truncated first draft because, I just find it massively helps you. You can write this outline and, I put in little bits of dialogue that have come to my head. It's reasonably detailed chapter by chapter, and I just find that so helpful for pacing because you can see it before you sit down and start hammering away, 30,000 words, then you realize, the pacing's all wrong, it's all wrong. You should be able to identify glaring issues at that early outline stage. I mean, obviously, I then start to follow that outline really closely and something will happen and it'll completely change. And at that point, you're sort of adapting your outline a bit, or you just say, forget about it. But I find it incredibly helpful to have that because I can spend, a week outlining a story. And then when it comes to write it, if you've outlined it reasonably well, then you never get stuck. As long as you've thought, I try and think about the scene transitions and how we get from, does this chapter flow into that one? Or, try and eliminate the bits where you get stuck. Usually, Act 1's fine. It's the bit where you're getting from Act 2 into Act 3, where you know what the climax is, and you just need to get all the pieces and all the characters in place. That's the bit where I really try and make sure I've got that down. And I will find a way to get to that to bring us into Act 3. Because there's nothing worse than getting 2/3, 3/4 the way through and then being like, I know what I want to do. I've got, everyone's in the wrong place. Nothing is, working. I have pantsed stories as well, but not under my own name. I write under a few pseudonyms as well. So I've done ones like that. And I do like it. I think it works, but I tend to do those for slightly less complicated stories. I can't imagine, especially, Tommy might have worked actually because it's fairly stream of conscious in a way, but certain ones like my murder mysteries and things, I cannot imagine just sitting down and writing that. Like I remember seeing Stephen King saying he doesn't outline, and I was reading Needful Things at the time. It's just like the most fiendishly complex book where every single thing is paying off beautifully. 500 pages later, it's like, I don't know how he does it. It's just, well, that's why Stephen King, isn't it? It's really impressive. Whereas me, I prefer an outline. That would be my preference for most books.
Yeah, I imagine besides keeping you from writing yourself into a corner, it probably eliminates a few rewrites.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
People can be quite dismissive of outlines sometimes, and it annoys me a teeny wee bit. They'll be like, I just like to let the words flow from me. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, we don't just pull an outline out of our arse, you still have to let the words flow out onto the page as an outline. It's just a condensed version of it, I mean, whatever works for you is what to go for. But, yeah, like I say, I think of an outline as a really short first draft so that if I do spot any glaring errors or problems, it's less of a faff to fix it,
Yeah. Well, Becky returns to the shop to pick up her videos only to find that the shop owner, Andy, says only one of the 3 is ready and she'll have to come back for the other 2. So she decides to stop by her sister Flora's house. But Flora, a fan of casual sex, is waiting for a gentleman caller and sends Becky away. So Becky is socially anxious and non-sexual. Well, I guess I shouldn't say non-sexual, but, is not exactly the primary thing on her mind. While Flora is aggressive and very sexual. Why did you choose to put them at odds with each other in terms of personality and their relationship in general?
Put them at odds. Well, a couple of reasons.
I mean, I can think of a good one for the story, but but as far as just in general, like, their personalities are so different. And
yeah, I think one thing is you always want a bit of conflict. I mean, that's an obvious thing to say for fiction. All fiction is, it's mostly conflict, but sometimes when you're reading the book, especially sort of like horror fiction and things, you'll have great conflict and drama within the horror scenes, but oftentimes the more expository stuff or the more sort of casual drama scenes in between can be a bit less interesting. So I think, even just putting a couple of characters who are at odds with each other that is not massively relevant to the overarching horror story you're telling is creating some conflict and creating some interest. And also as well, like I say, because it's a fairly downbeat book with a lot of nastiness in it, it gave me an opportunity to put in, a couple of little laughs. It's good to have a couple of wee laughs in there. Also as well, I kind of wanted to show how Becky related to all the characters in the book really before I revealed in the book that she was autistic. And yeah, again as well, another slightly cruel thing for poor old Becky is, I put her at odds with her sister in a way because I wanted her to just feel totally alone in this book. The way that a lot of autistic people do feel among non-autistic people and also among everyone, it can be.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of her being autistic, Becky I'm talking about, has been recently diagnosed with autism, and Flora mentions that she inherited it from their father. And Becky is in the process of something referred to as unmasking. Can you tell us a little bit about what unmasking is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'll preface this by saying I'm by no means an expert. I am autistic myself. But, anything that I'm going to say about like autism in general, it's very much, it's not a blanket sweeping statement. Like I say at the very end of the book, autism is, as we know, a spectrum. And there's a saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person because everyone is different. But generally, so a lot of autistic people, generally with sort of lower support needs, will learn to hide their autistic traits. So things like stimming, which is the most common sort of ones you would see, would be like rocking back and forth or like fidgeting with a toy or something like that. They'll sort of play that down, hide it, or their special interests as well, which is, again, picking the most sort of common, like obvious ones that people know would be like, an incredible interest in trains or pylons or something like that. So when you're masking, you're hiding those elements of yourself, those key elements of yourself that are really important to you and that do help you through the day. And you're hiding those so you can sort of blend in and seem less autistic. It's generally, especially at the start, it's not something you're consciously aware that you're doing. It's just something that you do, which is why you get a lot of late diagnosed people, because they have been masking all this time. So people will be like, oh, what, you're autistic? Well, I don't see that. I've never noticed that. And it's like, yeah, because we've been hiding it. Yeah, like we've been hiding it really, really well. And that's why you've not known. So a lot of autistic advocates would talk about unmasking as a way to sort of throw off the shackles of oppression, celebrate being autistic, your true authentic self. And it's actually like probably the most important key part of the book, because let's say Becky's sort of journey across the entire book is about learning to truly unmask, which is a bit of a mad thing to put as your hook for your book, because most people aren't going to get that at all, but that's absolutely fine. This is very much a book. I wrote it for my autistic readers and for myself in the hopes that non-autistic people will also still enjoy it. But luckily the feedback I've had from autistic readers so far has been absolutely fantastic, and also the feedback I've had from holistic people or non-autistic people has been very positive as well. So, hopefully it's worked.
Yeah. Well, when Becky gets home and watches the first film, she finds something as surreal and bizarre as a David Lynch film. The film was a television show called Rumplejack that was put into production but never finished. And at the beginning of the book, it's revealed that Rumplejack was produced by a man who hated children and just he hated most things, it seemed like.
Yeah.
But it was odd that he was in the business of producing children's content and he hated children. So, did the hateful nature of the producer influence the life that the series seemed to take on?
The short answer is no, but I really love your your take on that. That's a really fun way to look at it. It was actually just to add a bit of color to the character because he's in it for such a short time, and he's the first character you meet is this guy. So I needed to make him a little bit interesting, a little bit fun, and the idea that someone who really wanted to produce prestige television, you know, a Play for Today and all these important shows, and somehow ends up producing children's TV that he absolutely hates. I thought it was just quite a fun little character. I grew up reading James Herbert and Sean Hudson and things like that. I don't know if you're familiar with Sean Hudson or James Herbert. So they're very, very British. So James Herbert, I think he used to outsell Stephen King in the UK. Fantastic author. And so is Sean Hudson.
I'm uncultured swine.
That's all right. You may have heard of The Rats or The Fog, not the John Carpenter Fog, but if you ever come across them from James Herbert, well worth reading.
Okay.
But what they did a lot of the time, they would introduce a character just to get killed. You know, so you would say in Sean Hudson's Slugs, you know, their slugs are killing people. And so you'll have a chapter with the character who's trying to get to the bottom of the mystery. And then every second chapter is just someone who appears, you get a little bit of bio about them, and then they get killed, you know. And sometimes it's really cool. Sometimes it works. They've got some interesting stuff. But I use Slugs as an example specifically because I remember one particular chapter where it's about, I think it's Harold and his prize marrows that he's growing in the garden. And it's about 5-6 pages of hearing about him and his fucking marrows. And then he gets killed by a slug. And I'm like, there's got to be a more interesting, exciting way to do that. Some way to get some laughs and stuff. So when I've got these little characters who just pop up to die, I try and give them as much of a rich, amusing backstory as I can. So I'm not talking about marrows and lettuces. I really love the idea that his hateful nature to children influenced the show. That's really cool.
It was like, did it take on a life of itself and just morph into this creature known as Rotten Tommy? Well, once the proprietor of the electronics store, Andy, saw the videos, he planned to use them with his partner. Is it Serge or Sergey?
Serge.
Serge. Okay, to use them with his partner Serge to showcase them on their YouTube channel, Land of the Lost Media, where they discuss missing TV shows and films. Due to an unfortunate event, Andy was unable to produce an episode showcasing the lost Rumplejack material with Serge. So, how was Rotten Tommy connected to the actual visuals with the Rumplejack footage? Were the visuals recorded and his essence attached to them, or were they visual representations of his psyche?
I gave that absolutely no thought whatsoever. I didn't care is the actual answer. You have to create a world that's, you know, believable and it follows a sort of reasonably consistent logic up to a point. But when it came to the tapes and Tommy and things, I thought to hell with it, you know. I read a lot of horror, but my influences are very much film based. So for this book, my key influences, I would have said, were things like definitely some David Lynch, like Lost Highway being a major one. I mean, in that film, you know, you're following a character and then halfway through the film, he just changes into a different character completely. Not just a different actor, he changes into a different character. Everyone in the film's like, oh, you're someone totally different now. Yeah. So things like that. One of my all-time favorite films is The Beyond by Lucio Fulci. It's an Italian horror from the early 80s. And it just goes into the realm of sort of surreal dream logic. You know, they're in the hospital, they go down the flight of stairs and they're like, oh, we're in the basement of our hotel now, you know? That sort of thing. And that is the way I sort of try to approach the sort of key horror sequences in Rotten Tommy, and specifically the videos. It didn't matter to me in the slightest that they were absurd and bizarre and made no sense. In fact, I viewed that as a positive. The difficulty with that, of course, is convincing readers that it's deliberate.
Uh-huh.
And not that I've like just forgotten to tell them or that it's really poorly written. Because, someone like David Lynch or Lucio Fulci, Dario Argento with Suspiria, they're internationally famous with huge bodies of work. People know what to expect. They're willing to go along for that ride because they know that it's a Lynch film. It's going to be weird. They know that. But as someone who's like a barely known indie author, it can be harder to convince people. So my hope was that after 9 books that have all made sense, that when I did offer them a slightly different style of storytelling than perhaps I usually do, that hopefully they would be willing to go along for the ride. If someone's reading that for the first time, like yourself, then there's nothing I can do about that. But it sounds like you enjoyed it anyway. So,
oh yeah.
So it worked.
Yeah, I'm detailed to a fault, I like to tell people.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Sometimes people are like, dude, suspension of disbelief. Will you just relax?
I don't want to say I gave it no thought at all, but it's true. I didn't, but I love your style, because I've listened to a few of your podcasts in preparation, and you're super detailed, but really drilled down into the books in a very thoughtful way. I mean, I appreciate these really thoughtful questions. That's great.
Thank you for that. Well, there is an event in the book where Becky and John have a huge argument. The next morning, Becky finds a note from John in which she identifies emotional manipulation in the form of John using a subtle turn of phrase to excuse his behavior. Since people with autism can be laser focused on certain things, are they usually good at identifying manipulative people? I know there's like issues with social cues a lot of times, but as far as like sussing out underlying manipulative tactics, are they good at doing that? And can people on the lower functioning end of the spectrum do that as well?
I mean, again, I know what people are like. They're gonna, if I say the wrong thing, they will be annoyed. So I generally, from my experience, from the experience of people I know, from the experience of what I've read about, I'd say generally autistic people are perhaps less good at identifying manipulative people. There's a lot of very sad and unfortunate history with abuse and bullying, with people being easily manipulated, oftentimes because sort of struggling, like you say, social cues, but also taking things literally. That's definitely an issue. So it's not always the case. It's a tough one because I can only really speak for myself. I don't think I'm easily manipulated, but I definitely do misunderstand people in terms of things like tone of voice, or perhaps something that I thought, they said a really nice thing to me, but someone will come up afterwards and go, that was so sarcastic. Oh man, that was terrible. They said that. And I was like, I thought it was a compliment.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, didn't she have a history of some sort of bullying or having issues? And I guess just kind of recently, as she got older, got diagnosed, started the unmasking, she kind of developed the abilities to kind of read cues and maybe suss out manipulation a little better.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of times you do get better with the age. It's funny with autism, there's things that you could handle really well as a younger person, just using myself as an example, crowds, busy places, noise and things, I handle much worse nowadays, but things that I perhaps struggled with back then, you do learn, or you can learn, I should say, to deal with certain things. With Becky, I'm trying to remember. The problem is I write these books and then I just completely forget about it once it's out. Just move on to the next.
Well,
five.
You've moved on to the next. Yeah. You're like, I need more creative process.
I think with Becky, I didn't want to overload her with too many autistic traits to the point where it almost becomes parodic, because it's really tough finding the balance of making it enough that the reader will understand, okay, so I'm getting a sort of glimpse of what autism is, without it being like, just giving her literally every single trait, So
turning her into a caricature.
Exactly. And it was so important to me that I didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, after Becky learns about the issues with Andy and her videos, she has to give a statement to the police. Enter Detective Constable Larkin. Becky is obsessed with Jason Statham movies, even the mindless ones. I forget which examples she gives.
Oh, I think it's that awful Uwe Ball one, the In the Name of the King Dungeon Siege Tale.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe it's War. Oh, I mentioned a few terrible ones in there, but also some good ones.
Well, just my favorite is Revolver, just so we're clear on that one.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to keep quiet.
You didn't like Revolver? Oh, man. Okay. Well, so she's obsessed with Jason Statham movies, even the mindless ones, and thinks that Larkin is pretty much a dead ringer for Statham. She gets the general impression that Larkin is attracted to her, but isn't sure because being autistic makes it difficult for her to interpret social cues. So, hearkening back to 5 seconds ago when we were kind of talking about this, is this something that can be learned through like cognitive behavioral therapy? And if so, what is the cause of autistic folks having difficulty with just learning it naturally? Like, what do you think is the breakdown? Is it like the very narrow channel they have open for stimulation because they're very easily overstimulated?
It can be a number of things, I think. I mean, from what I've read about and also from my limited experience with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is that it generally doesn't work particularly well with autistic people. I've read it can be good for dealing with trauma, but when it comes to stimuli, it often doesn't work. A lot of autistic people have alexithymia, which is a difficulty or even an inability to understand or read your own emotions and moods. And that can be an issue with CBT because you don't necessarily think to use it because you can't actually tell that you're anxious at that time. You think you might be hungry. You know, it sounds absurd, but it's completely true. And things that work for some people, so say, what's it called? Is it exposure therapy, where if you don't like something, you face it and you stick with it. But with a lot of autistic people, there's a sort of hyper-connected brain where the synapses haven't pruned from childhood the way that they do with non-autistic people. So you can be maybe less focused on sort of social things and certain noises. Say there's a ticking clock. From a lot of people, they would be like, oh yeah, it annoyed me at the start and then I just stopped noticing it. But it's generally the exact opposite with a lot of autistic people, so that the more you are exposed to that, the louder it gets, the more annoying it gets, the more obnoxious, until you want to take that clock off the fucking wall and smash it over your fucking knee, you know? So yeah, I gather CBT doesn't work particularly well, but I've read some people say it did work for them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense as far as, what was it again?
Alexithymia.
Alexithymia. I guess that makes sense because if you're not aware of your own emotional state, and I think CBT, you have to have an accurate baseline to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And like me, you talk about wanting to smash something when you were talking about immersion therapy. That word makes me want to smash something. I have issues with OCD, and it used to be super bad when I was like 10, 12, early teens.
Yeah.
I've grown out of quite a bit of it, but I still have an issue with obsessively checking stuff. And I bought a book one time. They made it sound like it was this brand new breakthrough in the treatment for OCD. And all it was immersion therapy. Like, I could have summed the entire book up. I think I could have summed it up into the phrase, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm like, really? That's the breakthrough? I mean, I understand. It's kind of like people are always looking for fad diets when it comes down to, well, just burn more than you take in. But like,
it's
so
basically, get used to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I fell for false advertising. God.
That's how they get you, man.
Not supposed to do that with, well, I guess they do it with books all the time. Disregard that statement. I recant. But circling back to the book, Becky takes the videos to the care home and has her dad watch one of them. Now, the first video was tame compared to the second. Her dad began acting erratically and had an emotional outburst when he saw the film. And because his mental state was so altered, he couldn't really articulate what he knew about what was happening, but he definitely knew who Rotten Tommy was. So Was her father's mental state due to natural causes, or did it have something to do with Rotten Tommy, like some sort of effect he possibly had on him? And can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, I can expand a tiny bit in that it was natural causes, yeah. Her father may have, in his moments of lucidity, thought that perhaps there was some connection to Tommy, but actually, in like my sort of version in my head where I know what everything is, there's absolutely no connection between that. No, he just had dementia. It was nothing to do with Tommy.
Okay. Well, who was, and this may be a spoiler, so if it is, don't answer it, but I'm just curious. There was a character named Mr. Boo, and Becky's mother, Meredith, is in the film and refers to Mr. Boo by, and I'm not going to say the name just in case, but refers to him by a particular name. Is that somebody that I should know from reading the book? Because I was racking my head, like, who is this guy she's referring to?
No, it's not. So it's not even a spoiler, I would say. So that character, Mark. Yep.
Who the hell is Mark?
He is just someone that was on the production team of Rumplejack.
Okay.
And I removed, I think there was a version way back where I was like, oh, come on, Mark, we've worked together for 2 years, and I was like, you know what? Don't need it. The fact that she knew this weird character by his real name was just to create that little sense of mystery where it's like, because by this point we've met a few very unusual anthropomorphic characters, shall we say.
Uh-huh.
So it was to let you know that actually, yeah, there is a weird backstory to all these characters as well. You might not ever find out what it is, but
You're just going to keep those to yourself?
Yeah.
Wow. I love how you just said that. Yeah. What
you gonna do about it?
Yeah, I was like, you gonna do something? Well, let's see here. Things continue to get worse when DC Larkin tells Becky that he's seen Rotten Tommy after watching the first film. If Larkin had disregarded the videos and closed the case some other way, just kind of went off on a different tangent, would Rotten Tommy have left him alone, or are you pretty much a dead man walking once you see the film? And can you kind of expand on that a little?
Yeah, he would have been dead anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Rotten Tommy will not stop once you have seen him. And there's a reason for that in the original draft, which is a spoiler. Can I word it in a way that does not spoil it? Yeah, you know what? It's not, because, no, it fucking is. I'll tell you off air.
Okay.
Unless, if you're not read the book yet and you're worried about being spoiled, do not listen to the next 30 seconds or so. So in the original draft, Tommy wanted Becky to be his friend. I think you infer that from the book anyway, probably. And he kills everyone who wrongs her in some way. So Andy, sister, husband, all seen as threats to her well-being. And then Larkin was seen as a threat to her by possibly putting her in jail, and also a threat to her and Tommy's friendship that she's not even aware of yet. That was the original sort of concept.
Okay. So he is jealous as fuck.
Yeah. Or a really good friend,
Either way. Yeah, because they're all shitbags. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just trying to protect her. Okay. I got you. All right. Listeners at home, welcome back. The spoiler is over.
There you go. There's hopefully an exclusive for you there.
Yeah. Well, throughout the story, Becky is kept company by a plush penguin named Grumpus. And it seemed like almost anyone with anxiety could have an attachment to a stuffed animal, and sometimes people have emotional support dogs. Is there something specific about autism that drew her to the stuffed animal, or was it purely anxiety?
I mean, it's certainly absolutely 100% is an anxiety thing, but anxiety is incredibly common with autism. And a lot of autistic people certainly really enjoy having not necessarily a plush animal, though it quite often is, big collections of squishmallows and jelly cat cuddly toys and things like that. But it can be anything. I, as a teenager, carried around a little brass pig that had a really wonderful weight to it. So it was the sort of thing that could completely ground you, because even though it was small and fit in my wallet, it was quite heavy. So that sort of worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely, from what you see on the Reddit autism, r/autism or r/autism translated, there's definitely a very healthy amount of autistic people who very much enjoy cuddly toys. I'm sure there's also a healthy amount who do not at all. But yeah, definitely I would say it's anxiety, but anxiety very commonly comorbid with autism, the way that ADHD is very often found alongside as well.
Yeah. And I apologize for the repeated questions, but I love psychology. So
not a problem at all.
So just two more questions that kind of piggyback off that. Did she do anything to drown out overstimulation that I don't remember? Because I don't remember her wearing like headphones when she went downtown. And is that the reason she took the bus? She doesn't drive because of like having to deal with, I mean, I have problems with road rage. I can't imagine somebody that has issues with overstimulation driving in like a downtown traffic scenario.
Funnily enough, you're absolutely right, but she doesn't drive because I based a reasonable amount of her character on me. Not all of it, I want to make that very clear, not all of it, but a reasonable amount on me, and I don't drive, partly because I live in a very small city that you can walk from one side off to the other in a few hours, so I don't need to drive. I'm within walking distance of work, and so it just never even occurred to me that she would drive. But also, there's no way I would ever drive, because I would be distracted by the first, nice tree that I drove past, and I would drive straight into a river. I would be the most hopeless driver. I'm so easily distracted. Or I would be concentrating so much on the roads and gripping the wheel that I would just have an aneurysm or something. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
Funnily enough, the overstimulation one's an interesting one, because headphones or ear guards, ear protectors and things would actually be something that would be quite commonly used. I use very, very good noise cancelling in-ear headphones. But again, that was one of those things where it was like I didn't put that in because of the risk of giving her too much.
The caricature.
That begins to turn off readers, being like, okay, I get it.
We get it. Point made.
Jesus.
Well, there is a scene where Larkin is in the police station and is paid a visit by Rotten Tommy. And it seems like all of a sudden the station is empty and it's just him and Rotten Tommy in this surreal alternate reality of the police station. Where was Larkin when he was accosted by Rotten Tommy? Was he still in the station, or was Rotten Tommy assaulting him in his mind? Is that one of those intentionally ambiguous things?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's a sort of supernatural surrealism, let's call it. Kind of like the idea I mentioned before with the sort of style of the book being that it'll suddenly go into this other. I think alternate reality is actually a really, really good way of putting it. I think that makes a lot of sense, because he is physically still in the police station, but, the characters coming along later on would probably, I imagine, find the door that's been smashed in. It's the metal door that Tommy's bent into to get through. But there would be no record of him on any of the CCTV cameras or anything like that. It's not explained, and I don't care in the nicest possible sense, there's a line in the book, if I remember correctly, something about every day we face the inexplicable in some sort of micro or macro level, and we just sort of accept it. So it's kind of like that in a way, but on a much grander, deadlier scale. It's happening, but no one can see it happening, but it is happening. Did it take place within a certain time period that, I don't know, but it doesn't matter to me. Yeah.
I remember the line you're talking about. I'm trying to remember exactly how. I'll have to look that up after we're done here. Yeah. Well, after watching what I believe was the third video, Becky finds that her parents had been trying to protect her from Rotten Tommy. So what was it about Becky? I mean, even with the spoiler, which I'll just allude to, you don't have to rehash it because we've told people it's safe to come back. What was it about Becky that made Rotten Tommy want her so badly out of all the girls in the world?
That would be probably the one question where I do have an answer, but
Do you?
I'm not going to say it.
Damn it.
I'm going to say no. Sorry.
That's the carrot at the end of the stick. Listeners at home, follow it.
Read it and find out. Available on Amazon.
Well, I mean, is it explicit in the book? Am I just missing it?
Nope, absolutely not. No.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you.
And in fact, I would say it's never, even in the outlines where I made things a lot clearer, that particular reason is not. But part of my reasoning for that, I'll say that, is that for me, it's Becky's story. The book is Becky's story, and everyone else is sort of around there, sort of helping it to happen. But the reason Tommy wants Becky specifically is part of Tommy's story, which I wasn't telling. I would say that, yeah, that's probably the most political way to put it, is that it's Becky's story, so that aspect of it, I don't think matters. People may well disagree with me on that, but for me, it's about Becky's journey and her story, so yeah.
Okay. So it's not even in the outline, so there would have to be some drug-assisted interrogation involved, is what you're telling me?
Yep.
Well, the series Rumplejack ruined the lives of everyone unfortunate enough to view it. So who wrote the screenplay for it? And did they in any way tie into the story?
It's a great question, which I didn't even consider. I'd never thought about who wrote it. There's a line in the book that sort of answers it in a way. Is it still in there? You've read it more recently than me, you might remember. Where I think when they're talking to the character in the Institute, he says something along the lines of, it started writing itself, or they lost control. So there was a screenplay, certainly, but that would have just been the usual sort of, kind of trashy TV.
He was just the guy that was in charge of the budget and stuff, right?
Yeah, he was the producer, so he would have been in charge of sort of getting the director, all the different relevant departments together. I think was his role. I can't remember if that's producer or executive producer, but I think on
he was definitely not the writer. Yeah.
No, he wasn't. No. But I think if there was a writer, it just would have been the usual. See, all my references are very, very, very uniquely British, like 1982 to 84 Rainbow Puddle Lane stuff that I imagine most of your listeners will have absolutely no idea what they are. In fact, they're all mentioned in the first chapter, if I remember correctly, all my major references for it. But once they got on the set, and this was vaguely covered in one of the outlines, I think, in the first outline, that, the set was just that, a set. There was no town, and the town sort of grew around it. The people, the characters, the story, all sort of just, they completely lost control. And it took on a life of its own for reasons that were told three different ways, in the outline. So I never covered the writer. That would have been quite an interesting thing to do, actually. But I thought, what was going to be written was not as interesting as what grew out of what it came to be.
Gotcha. Well, Becky's sister Flora and her husband John watch one of the videos, and it becomes evident that the videos are not necessarily fixed in time. I know the film is on VHS because of the time period, but does the fact that the show is on actual film as opposed to digital, like a thumb drive or a CD or something, does that allow it to be fluid? And if so, would what happened to Flora and John be possible if they were watching a digital copy?
It would be possible. I think that, if I'm remembering correctly, they are watching a burned DVD. I might be wrong. No, they are watching the video, aren't they? You're right.
Yeah,
because they've got the video set up. She's ordered the video. You're totally right.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. That works even better then.
Because bad things happen to people when they watch the digital, but that particular thing, without spoiling it, that happens specifically on the VHS film.
Yeah. And that certainly, I think if I had done that on digital, it wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have been as effective. There's something about film, videotape, analog media that it has a unique...
Got some romance to it.
It does, doesn't it? And I'm really wondering what younger readers, if they would disagree. because they maybe don't have that nostalgic connection to it that I'm sure you and I do.
Yeah, I mean, the image is on the film.
Yeah.
A disc, you're just interpreting zeros and ones, you know?
Yeah, totally. There's just, there's something about it, and the tactile nature of it, the feel of it, you know, the way that, the tape's moving through, and you can manipulate that, you can move it back and forth, there's something wonderful about old analog media that just doesn't translate to digital. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti-digital at all. You know, there's some amazing uses of digital technology, you know, most things, but there's some intangible, some essence that I just love of videotapes. You know, imagine, you know, say Ringu or The Ring, you know, the Japanese film or the remake, where it's the cursed videotape. Have you seen that one? Yeah. It just, imagine it was a DVD or something, or even worse, you know, a thumb drive. Like, can you imagine?
Oh, God.
Awful. They just Bluetooth it to each other. It's like, it wouldn't be the same. And maybe back in the day that wasn't the case, but then it would have been maybe a canister, a roll of film or something. Yeah, there's always something before that we can nostalgically look back on and get a little free zone of recognition. Yeah. Yeah, to answer your question, I don't think it would have been the same thing if they were watching a digital rip, a file, DVD recording or something, no.
Yeah. Well, one of the scariest aspects of Rotten Tommy is his hammer. What did you consider when determining what kind of weapon he would wield, and what made you decide that he needed a weapon? Are you a fan of Thor?
Well, this was the thing, because I thought he needed a weapon. I did a book before where I did a slasher novel where all of the violence inflicted on people was just with the body, hands, teeth, things like that. So there was no weapons in it. So I'd sort of done something like that. So I thought he does need a weapon. And originally I thought, we'll give him the big sledgehammer because he's a big man. And then I kind of really fell in love with the idea of giving him a little meat tenderizer because he's this huge hulking brute.
Oh, that is what it was. It was a meat tenderizer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah, because he's like a blunt instrument and he needs like something to bludgeon people with. I saw him as a bludgeoner, but the idea that all he needed was this tiny little meat tenderizer to absolutely destroy a person was quite funny. And then also towards the end of the book, when he turns up with a sledgehammer, you know he means fucking business. You know, it's like, okay, he's brought the big guns now. I think that's a fun image of him walking along, dragging the sledgehammer behind him, you know, and you're like, I love when a book has a moment where you're like, it's on. It is on, you know, and that for me is him walking through the car park. You're like, yeah, here we go.
Well, and then not only do you have his footsteps, but you have that metal drag to go along with it.
Scraping
like,
along, and then he can bludgeon someone in the head, and then they stick to it. He's hit them so hard, so he's dragging their body. Oh, marvelous.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're fine. There's nothing. We just like horror. Don't be afraid. Well, I hesitate to go any further because I don't want to give away the ending. But is there anything you can tell me about the Rylac Corporation that won't ruin the ending? If not, I'll move on to some other topics I have.
No, I can say that this is not the last that you will see of the Rylac Corporation. While Tommy and Becky's stories finish with this book, Rylac's, it's just kind of beginning.
Okay.
Beginning for the readers, because the Rylac Corporation has been around longer than you would think. So you'll be seeing more of them in my books. Sometimes it's just going to be incidental, but we're maybe building towards something a bit. That's all I'll say on that, because that's, we're, getting ahead of myself.
Yeah. Well, it was a great book. Listeners at home, buy it, read it, and review it. And like I mentioned, I love psychology. The psychological elements in the book are amazing, both with the exposition, I guess you would say, of autism, as well as just the crazy psychological terror inflicted by Rotten Tommy. But also the violence in Rotten Tommy is brutal, but well placed. What genre do you consider your particular brand of horror, and how does the violence in Rotten Tommy compare to your other works?
It's a difficult one. I mean, in terms of the violence, that's an easier question to answer, I guess. I would say it's on the lower end of the scale, somewhere around the middle. A couple of books have definitely gone way further. I one prior to this, and By God's Hand You Shall Die. That's probably the most extreme and nasty. I've gone really sadistic stuff in that. This one, I thought, there's probably one scene where, let's say, the suitcase scene. I'd say it's not too bad, this. I wouldn't say it's anywhere near like extreme or splatterpunk or anything like that. It's somewhere around the middle. I do love crazy over-the-top violence and gore, but it's rarely really mean-spirited and graphic. I do cut away and leave something sort of implied generally.
That's one thing I would say is the violence is pretty graphic, but like if it was splatterpunk, I would say that the descriptions would go on for way longer. Yours are like a hot punch and then they're over. Whereas like splatterpunk I've read is like, all right, I'm on page 3 of this description of somebody getting slaughtered.
Absolutely. I don't dwell on it. I have written under pseudonyms. I have written sort of extreme sort of splatterpunk stuff where I have gone on for pages and pages. It has its place as well, but in my stuff, which I would view as being slightly more on the verge of mainstream up to a point, like a punch of violence here, where it's like brutal and you get a chance to revel in the awfulness and then move on to the next thing. With regards to genre, I don't know, man. I honestly don't know, because I feel like I would just classify myself as independent horror, because I love all genres of horror, absolutely everything. So if you look at the, say, 10 books that I've done, you've got cosmic horror, you've got a western horror, you've got a slasher, a romance horror, you've got a religious one, you've got biker exploitation, sort of 70s biker sort of violent action thing, kidnap stuff. I love working in horror. So, I mean, you know what, let's say horror is my genre, but
all encompassing.
Yeah, I love it all, and I just love mixing it up and writing in different genres and stuff. So yeah, I've seen people call me splatterpunk. I don't think I am. I think people who are really into splatterpunk would be appalled at the lack of violence in my books. But yeah, if they want to call me that, that's absolutely fine. I'm perfectly happy to be labelled as splatterpunk or extreme if they want.
Gotcha. Well, with regard to what we've been talking about throughout the show, your autism was late diagnosed in your life. What led you to seek the counsel of the individual who diagnosed you? If that's not too personal.
I'm going to keep it slightly vague. That's going to be really vague, actually, to be honest with you. I'd say I thought I was autistic, and I jumped through many hoops to get to a diagnosis. Luckily, Edinburgh, there's not a 2-year waiting list, let's say, like there are in certainly most of America, I believe, and a lot of the UK as well. Funnily enough, something I don't mind saying is would be years back when I published my first few books and stuff, I did used to get some messages from people saying, I really liked how some of your characters are, autistic coded. And I was like, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. I've maybe putting myself into them a little bit. I don't know. I hadn't thought of it. And, because I don't go back and read my books again, I have no idea where they might be getting that from. I have no idea. But I just thought that was quite interesting, because at the time, I never thought of it. I didn't think, it must be because I'm putting myself in, It's just looking back in retrospect being, I wonder if that's why. Who knows? If anyone reads, what was the specific ones? I think it was Forgotten Island and Dead Girl Blues, and you think that perhaps Willow or Anna are potentially autistic representation, let me know. I'd be curious.
All right. Well, when did you start writing seriously with the intent to publish? And was there anything happening in your life at the time that served as the impetus for it?
I've been writing stories since I was very, very, very young. I think my first story that I still have a copy of is a sort of alien invasion thing, which I was in primary 3, which I think puts me at about 8 years old. But when I started writing sort of seriously, I think it would have been Now, Forgotten Island, my first novel that I published, came out in, I think, September 2018. But I'm pretty sure in November before that, I'd written my very first novel, The Cairngorm Horror, it was called. I'd done NaNoWriMo, I'm not sure how it's actually pronounced, the National Novel Writing Month, where you're supposed to do 2,000 words a day every day of November, and you're going to end up with a 50, 60,000 words novel.
Mm-hmm.
It was shite, that book. But it had enough elements in it that I kept going and wrote The Forgotten Island. And I've since taken all the good parts from the Cairngorm Horror and used them in other books. So that book will never be published, in case anyone's wondering. All the good bits are gone. But yeah, it would have been 2018, I think. Yeah, that was when I published my first one. So around about that. Yeah, because it was on my honeymoon in 2017 when I came up with the idea for Forgotten Island. Yeah, sorry, I'm just travelling down memory lane here. You've unleashed me. Yeah, I had a sort of small following on Instagram. I mean small, it was about 300 people or something. I don't mean small, it was only 10,000 or something like that. And a lot of them bought my book and liked it. And then it just sort of carried on from there. Dedicated readership. I would like to thank all my readers out there.
Hell yeah.
For sticking with me, and it's cheers, guys.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, based on your social media handle and the pictures you post, you are a fan of pugs.
Oh, yeah.
So are you a fan of pugs in general or just a fan of Boris the pug? And can you tell us about Boris?
Yes, well, the good news is because we're recording this sort of US time, it's late at night here in the UK, so Boris is actually asleep, which listeners, believe me, you will be very grateful for because he barks and yelps all the way through. As soon as I try to do a podcast or any sort of Zoom meeting,
thank God.
Absolutely berserk. I love pugs. I love pugs so much. I've always loved them. That's not true. I've loved them for about 15 years or something.
Yeah.
Once you get a pug, everything in the house, if someone's buying you a present, a mug, a card, a cushion, it's got a pug on it. The house it's a pug house. But Boris he's actually 9 in, what's the date? He's 9. Well, of course, he will turn 9 by the time you're listening to this podcast, listeners. Yeah, he's just the best guy in the world. He just sits next to me while I write, like a little comfortable cushion, and snores. Occasionally annoys me, but that's what he does. He's my best pal.
Nice.
You got a dog?
I do. He was supposed to be a Maltipoo, but we're pretty sure he's a Jackapoo because he is insane.
Oh, brutal.
He's got to have some Jack Russell in him. He is just out of his mind. So
it's these little dogs, man. They're big personalities.
Oh, yeah. He's the biggest dude on the block, too. We have to be careful when we walk him because he will lash out at pit bulls and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. I know the type.
I was like, you are a chicken nugget. They will eat you. Calm down. So, well, I understand you and Michelle Martson, who has been on the show before, are going to be featured at the HorrorCon Scotland. Can you tell us a little bit about the HorrorCon?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was meant to be at the last year's one, but unfortunately it fell on the worst weekend of storms that Scotland had seen in, oh my God, 20 years or something.
Wow.
It was up in Aberdeen at that point, which is quite a long drive for us. Normally about 3 hours, but we were looking at, from the couple of people that I know, I think John McNee made it up there. I think he said it took him about 6 or 7 hours because all the roads were closed, flooded. Roads were actually breaking and floating away and things. So I was really disappointed because we have very, 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 very little in the way of conventions, horror cons, in Scotland and in fact the whole of the UK, to be honest. So this one's in Glasgow, so it's going to be even bigger. Glasgow's the biggest city in Scotland. It's going to be great. I've got a table. I'm going to be there selling books and things. I have not actually looked at who else is coming. I've seen a few traders, so I need to actually have a good look. I'm really excited about it. It's just nice to meet people and talk about horror. Bear in mind, I'm autistic, so it can be a little bit awkward in person, but you know what? We're just talking horror. We're talking about my books. I'll be absolutely fine. Just come up and say hi. If you've already got my books and you just want to bring them along and get them signed, that's absolutely fine as well. I'm very happy to do that. You don't need to buy them again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So Michelle's going, right, okay, I'll have a wee check. Yeah, it's going to be great. It's September 21st Sorry, I'm the worst salesman in the world. September 21st in Glasgow. It's run by one woman. She puts on all these events herself. So please, support it, because if we don't support that, we're not going to get any more. She's not going to be able to grow the company. And she puts a hell of a lot of work into it. And she's a great woman. So, help us out, guys.
Well, we've got a few glimpses into it over the last hour or so, but what is the life of David Sodergren like outside of writing?
That suggests there is one.
Oh, well, yeah, maybe there's not. Maybe writing is my life.
I mean, I have a day job that over the years, I've dropped from 5 days to 4 days to 3 days to 2 days.
Nice. Can I do that?
Well, a lot of work writing, and you might manage to sort of, slowly swapping the income over from one to the other.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I pretty much, I work 2 days at the day job. I work 4 or 5 days at writing. I try and keep some time, maybe the Saturday or something, free to spend some time with my wife. She works 5 days a week, so we'll always spend the evenings together and things. I like to go we walk in the country. I go to the cinema, but generally I prefer to be mostly just sitting at home writing. I'm never happier than when I'm just sitting, Boris next to me, writing away. I love it. It's the best job. I mean, you call it a job. It's like genuinely the thing I love doing most. So I feel very lucky in that respect. But also, I say luck, but my God, it's a ridiculous amount of... If I didn't enjoy it at all, it would be unbearable.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be awful, but I love every single aspect of it. Maybe not marketing so much, but writing, editing, designing, covers, all that sort of aspect of it, I absolutely adore.
Yeah, I love your aesthetic. The covers are amazing.
Yeah, well, as much as I hate thinking about it, you do have to consider branding and marketing and stuff, So the logo and the sort of matching covers, I have found that the 2 books that don't have matching covers don't sell as well as the ones that do. So I'm like, oh my God, do I just do a limited run of ones with matching covers, Mm-hmm. Who knows? But I think covers are so important. And, especially if you're an indie author and you have no marketing budget and you're not famous and you don't have, the backing of a traditional publisher, if you're fully independent like myself, cover, make sure you have a good cover. Please don't use those Amazon templates. If it's the one thing you can save up a bit of money for, just get a good cover, or try and do it yourself if you can. I know it's not possible for everyone, but it's...
You can do some amazing things with Canva.
Oh, you totally can. Yeah. Canva, Procreate, all these sort of things. Because like Photoshop, I use Photoshop, it's an Illustrator, but my God, it's ridiculously expensive. And I've just heard something about them possibly being able to use all your work for AI training or something. I've not looked into it properly, but that's depressing. Sorry to bring that downer up. But good covers. People will buy your book based on that cover. They will post about it on Instagram, which is my entire marketing scheme, is relying on word of mouth, people posting on Instagram. That's my marketing budget, is a treat for Boris so he can pose with my books. Yeah, cover's important.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely. No, I've had a really lovely time. Like I said, really great questions, really thoughtful, insightful. Yeah, fantastic. It's a pleasure talking to you, mate.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, so as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or let your readers know about? Maybe some things you want to reiterate?
Well, you know what, actually, normally, I could plug Rotten Tommy, obviously, but I think the listeners are probably think they've got a good idea that book exists by now. So I will plug my Patreon, because I just started that recently. Of course, I have no idea what the address is, because I just came up with it. I just remembered just now. But if you type in Patreon, if you put it in the show notes or whatever.
I'll put a link in the description.
I think if you type in Patreon David Sodergren or David Sodergren Horror Author, it should come up. But you're getting exclusive, early access to things, to chapters, to cover reveals, finding out about what I'm working on at the moment. You'll get your thank you at the end of each book. If you don't want to, you just want to support by buying the books or whatever, that's absolutely fine. I've got no pressure, but I want to try and make it as good an experience for people who are, willing to pay me money to read my ramblings, I will make it as great an experience for you as I possibly can. So I guess that would be my main plug, yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Listeners at home, all links are in the description. And David, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to everyone that tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow my radio channel by clicking the link in the description so that you can listen to the podcast live. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday when I will be joined by a writer that has taken dark romance and suspense and injected it into the setting of the underground kink community. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.
They wanna count me out. Next time pick a higher number. Next time you should run for cover. Next time let the giant slumber. They wanna keep me down. No amount of your words get humble. That spirit that refused to crumble. Got the wrong line reduced to mumbles. 2 a.m. on first. Imitate vultures how they lurk. 10 toes with it, I'm out of eye with you, boy. Challenge the best with your worst. This my turf. Way I move is inertia. Can't be stopped, it's unheard of. From the dirt, sweat got my feet muddy. Spend my Wednesday, might search you. On my word, path took plenty turns. It broke my confidence in cursive. When submerged, I found resolving my purpose and tell you about it back on surface. I survived. I survived. Ever been lost in the woods, praying that it don't get dark? Ooh. Ever been in a situation couldn't win, but you still had heart? Yeah, if you anything like me, evolve from chum to shark, the hunger starts to grow apart you didn't know you had. It's like that, flip the switch, turn it up, and I'm giving it gas. I lock it in off free, adrenaline double my percent. Made a home in the unknown, I swear I never fear again. I got ice in my blood, big enough to down this shit. I don't care how bad it get, I got 10 toes down, don't forget, I survived. I survived. When you on the brink and you in too deep, when you feeling weak, when it's hard to breathe, you gon' take a knee? Never. You gon' keep it G forever. Stand up and face whatever. I'm built unique, I'm better than the hard times I seen. Crime scene, obscene, face the ugly, cover up like Maybelline. Had uncertainty and urgency, cut from me like surgery. Formed again more sturdily, personally. I don't see nobody stopping me. I don't see nobody topping me. I don't see nobody honestly. I run you over if that's what it's gotta be. And it's gotta be what I look like, having fear still haunt me. What I look like, having regret haunt me. Pay that price, I don't care what it costs me. All my life been me against the army. I'ma push the red button on them like Atari. I'm big dog with a human like a Maltese. See more fall off the 03 tall tees. Not sorry for the way I am. Learn to ball them up with no one holding your hand. Never back down, never hide in the sand. If you ain't hear the message, let me say it again. Yo, let me say it again. I survived.